to continue this conversation, but I would like to bring up a few more guests who will be able to flesh this out into full technicolor. First, I'd like to bring up Alexandre Mars, who's the founder and CEO of the EPIC Foundation. Rebecca Rosen is the Associate Dean for Data Resources and Data Strategy at the Center for Urban Science and Progress at NYU. Micheal Ighodaro is a program and policy assistant at the AIDS Vaccine Advocacy Coalition, and Matthew Slutsky is the managing director of partnerships at change.org. Thank you guys all for joining us. We're talking about the relationship between a government and its citizens, and I want to start with you, Matthew, in terms of the change you've seen between citizens and governments, and whether or not the sort of, I'm not going to call it a veil, but the wall that has existed for a very long time, particularly on global health issues and or metropolitan health issues, how has that relationship changed in the work that you've seen?
Well, from my perspective, I see people starting issue campaigns, many of which are very local, asking local elected officials and leaders, mayors, et cetera, to do something. The tone has changed significantly in the last couple of years. What we first saw, and Change.org has been around for 7 or 8 years, what we first saw was people would start a campaign, lots of people would join it in the community, and what you would see is that elected officials or the folks in power would kind of do the duck and cover, the go into crisis PR mode, like it was a bad thing for these people to be engaging. And we have seen a very positive shift in sort of the tone and the ability and the desire to engage constructively in the dialogue. Now, when a mayor is petitioned, they actually see this as an opportunity to proactively engage, to actually listen and kind of like crowdsource great ideas or to listen to the problems of their constituents through these online petitions. That is a pretty significant shift in a very short amount of time. We live at a very awesome time when technology is changing just about everything.
Micheal, you have a really searing personal experience you had in Nigeria, and tell us a little bit about that, but also whether or not these are awesome times to be an advocate on the issue of HIV and AIDS.
Actually, I would say today it's an awesome time to be an activist because you usually have something to do. Right now, as you can know, the UN high-level meeting on HIV and AIDS is going on, and the draft declaration that was just released, it's for me, as I say, it's a license to discrimination for key populations. It gives my government a license to discriminate me, to send me to jail. And the declaration excludes key populations: gay men, men who have sex with men, sex workers, drug users, transgender women, and people who ingest drugs. It only lists them as people who are factors of HIV. Mm-hmm. Like we're only listed in that document as people who spread HIV. There's no any way that document they will list as people who actually are in front line of the epidemic. For instance, in New York City, ACT UP, for instance, in the 80s, they were the leaders of HIV. They were moving for it. And they were straight and gay allies all over the world, in South Africa, who were moving, who were in the front line of HIV. But in that declaration, it gives Nigerian government, it gives Zambia government, it gives Russian government a license to say, these are the groups who are at high risk of HIV, and you can actually discriminate them.
So you think it's working in reverse?
But I would say it's a reverse, because right now I would say Ambassador Burke is into the room. I hope she's not gone yet. And I'll ask her right now. There's a break line from now to 2 p.m. tomorrow that missions and government can actually break the silence on that declaration. Because if that declaration is signed on and it becomes a tool that government can actually use to send people like me to jail, to send people like my friends in Nigeria, in Zambia, in South Africa, to jail, then what are we doing here? Then why are we here? Are we really going to end the epidemic?
Mr. Mayor from Durban, I would like to get your thoughts on that. Is marginalization, is this actually working in reverse, the set of goals we're setting out?
Yes, I want to agree.
Specifically, as you know, if we're talking about an African population, I think we're talking about stigmatization and marginalization in a very specific context.
Well, yes. In fact, I'm saying that I want to agree with him. That's a big challenge that we're facing in the African continent, the issue of stigmatization, marginalization of people who are infected with HIV and AIDS. And I agree that we need to make sure that governments must actually take serious steps to make sure that people are not being discriminated on the basis of being infected with HIV and AIDS.
Alexandre, I know you work a lot. You work at sort of the intersection of a number of worlds. But when we're talking about key actors who can facilitate real change and maybe push where governments can't or act as a check on governments, corporations often have a lot of power. I mean, here we are sitting against a backdrop that has MAC on it because they've been at the forefront of this and have been leading. Tell us a little bit about how you work with corporations to push on issues that are really sensitive, if we're talking about sort of socio-cultural context.
Yes, thank you, Alex. It's a good point. We're always pushing people to give more. I think everyone, every time someone else coming to see you, say you should give more. You should be more, more giver. The issue is the money, the real money is with the corporate world. How can we shift part of this money to social good? Because whatever the good work you can do will never be enough. You as mayors or governments. So we need to go after this great corporation like MAC, say, guys, you should give more. So what we say is very clear. You should give 1% of your profit. Wherever you are, whichever country you are, you need to give something. Because this something will just change the world. Because I can give 1% of my own wealth, will be nothing regarding just what Apple can give with 40 billion of profit, right? That's what we are pushing people. And that's only if you make money, so if you make profit. When you don't make profit, and I know most of my friends are running startups, it's hard, but they can still give shares. That's what we push them to do, is giving something, because when you start something, when you are at the very beginning, 1% of zero is zero, right? I'm good at math. So you can give this. So maybe you will become the next Facebook, but then this money will be just for social good. So yes, we believe it's important to push people, but not only you, but CEOs, CMOs, CEOs.
Do you ever are there ever instances where you are pushing CEOs to get involved on a particular global health concern? And maybe it's something like HIV and AIDS, where certain segments of the population, there is social stigma attached to that particular disease, and they say, hey, we care about this, but for our market over there, it's just too complicated for us to get involved. Does that happen?
Yeah, yes, but what we are saying to people, for some people say, for me, it's HIV. For him, will be just climate changing. For her, will be maybe just youth or education. We want people to do. It could be and you have so many needs on Earth. Some people, for sure, you need to, bring this to your own passion. My passion personally is youth. So 0 to 25, that's where I spend my time. But I know that you have so many issues around us. For other people, just other CEOs will be something else. It's a very good, very good point here. For some people, you need always to connect what is important, for them, and connect this to their brain. That's what we're trying to do. And we need to use technology, because technology now exists. So you can check on your mobile phone, on your tablet, how many pills have been given in this, country, or how many kids have been just in the shelter last night. The goal is to use the tools that we are all using every single day to book this Uber or to buy a new BMW. We should do the same thing with social good.
I'm definitely booking more Ubers than buying BMWs. Rebecca, when we talk about the technology, it's a huge part of combating epidemics, but there are hurdles, right? It's not just the application falls from the sky, or this sort of intelligence falls from the sky. I mean, gathering the data and processing the data is an issue, right? I mean, if we talk about some cities have the capacity to do it better than others, tell us a little bit about your work and what you found on that front.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you, Alex. And this actually is relevant to what you were talking about earlier, about the dialogue, about what works. So it's, at the city level, that's where all the information is being gathered. If I'm a patient and I'm diagnosed with a disease, my data is captured in various different city agencies, and it's sitting in these secure data warehouses, and never shall they meet, right? And so there are various reasons why. There are no incentives for data sharing, and there's also no kind of capacity to do that analysis. So what we believe is one of the powers of the city is the presence of research universities. So New York University has a wealth of social scientists who are experts in working on these types of problems. They don't necessarily have access to the data, and the city agencies don't have access to the researchers. So what we believe is we're building a city-university partnership that facilitates the data collection and analysis, but also trains people on how to use it. It's almost like a coral reef model. That's the way we like to see it. We have data that comes together, code and tools that are built on top of that, but then we're training people and they become champions, they go back to their agency and they teach people in the agency how they use that data to inform major decisions within the city government.
Well, I mean, a big issue when we talk about getting data on people who have health concerns is the privacy issue, right?
Yes.
And I know we were talking about the ways in which you can inadvertently further stigmatize
Right.
people who are
Absolutely.
HIV positive. So in that kind of work, what are the considerations that
That's
are
right.
made?
And it's a very important consideration. We take generally a two-pronged approach. First, the technical approach. Obviously, security measures are taken around data. In our data facility, we actually color code our data based on the content. So it's green, yellow, and red. And that's a behavioral nudge to the researchers who are working with it. You kind of know what green, yellow, and red data are. Green data, there's nothing sensitive in there. Red, that's on lockdown. You should be very careful when you're using that data and you sign your terms of use. You're trained appropriately. So it's a two-pronged approach. It's social and it's technical. And it's very important that the people are trained appropriately to work with the data. And there are also very many technical approaches coming up to kind of de-identify data and make it useful for research.
Mayor Burke, from the position of a mayor of a city, right? To what degree are you seeking out partnerships with say academic institutions to help you? I mean, I think one of the questions is, especially in a forum like this, you hear about all these different silos of people doing awesome stuff, right? The question is, do they come together? And is there this sort of cross-pollination that you hope for?
Well, I start by saying that traditionally we have not done that, certainly not in Kingston. We have started that discussion. I wanted to add, though, that there is that partnership that we need to have with the academic community, but there's also another partnership that we need to have. And because we're cities and we sit at a point of collaboration, just bringing agencies together, again, to talk about these issues, mean that they get to share information, because there is also data sitting in various ministries and departments of government, and they have them, but they're not sharing, whether it's education, whether it's health, whether it's the police, the child development agencies. They all have that kind of data, but because they don't get a chance to sit together to discuss some of the issues, they don't have that fulsome grasp of the problem, and importantly, the resources that they each have, that those resources aren't coming together so that they can actually have a greater impact. That is what we have started doing. I agree with you that we also need to include in that the academic community, but it has been a long haul just to get the agencies together. In the case of Kingston, for example, we don't have direct authority in terms of issues like these. So we have just taken it on because we believe that the municipality, everything that happens in the municipality affects us. It affects the environment in which we govern. It affects the environment in which we can do just about anything. And so we have stepped in and we have pulled people together. And it has taken some time for individuals and institutions to actually recognize that that makes sense.
When we talk about this, Micheal, from an activist perspective, I wonder, setting aside the first part of the conversation, how responsive do you think governments have gotten, again, from an activist perspective on the subject of HIV and AIDS? I mean, we're here, it's taken a long time, but has there not been some progress made?
First of all, before I respond to your question, just to go back to the issue of data, and just to mention that people that get counted, it's what get attention. And people that need to be counted are not be counted. There are countries where gay men, transgender populations are not counted. So what kind of data do you get from countries where you have high risk, you say, for instance, Nigeria or again Zambia, where we have countries who have failed to release data on some populations, right? How are you guys going to get data in countries where it's even hard to identify those kind of people? So at AVAC, the organization I work for this year, we're going to release an report. It's called Big Data Real People. So this data are not just numbers, they are real people, they are human beings, right? And sometimes we kind of identify them as just numbers, and we don't go into this, they have different layers of issues. And as an activist, or not to identify as a researcher or as a technologist, But I'll say, for me, when I see numbers, people put these numbers out there, like yeah, we have 25,000 gay men who are infected with HIV, or we have only 5,000 gay men in Sudan. And I wonder, how do you get those numbers? Right. And how do you get those numbers?
Well,
Where do you get them from? Because I know.
Transparency is an issue.
For instance, I know more than 5,000, I mean, I don't know that, but I know groups of people who in different countries, like, who are gay men. I wonder when they tell me, like, we only have 5,000 gay men in Sudan, I wonder how do they get those numbers?
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of people probably would wonder about those numbers. Matthew, in terms of engagement and drawing people out from the shadows, from a campaign perspective, what works? I mean, apathy is one thing, and we'll talk about that.
Yep.
But practically, actually pulling the people who most need to be pulled out of the shadows, how do you do that?
So has anyone here signed an online petition, like on change.org? So that's a lot of people. The reason people sign these campaigns and the reason these go viral is because of the personal narrative behind them. I mean, ultimately, what social media has given all of us is a megaphone, and we're now able to tell our story in a really powerful way. And what we see on our site and if you're looking around at social media anywhere, what works is what is personal and what is sort of authentic and what is people being brave and putting themselves out there. Those are the campaigns that really spark interest with broader audiences. And so I would say that is the kind of hallmark. We have 30,000 petitions started every single month on change.org. The common denominator with every successful campaign, a campaign that has a likelihood of winning, is a powerful personal narrative, and that ultimately is the thing that is going to get people engaged and interested in an issue that, as we've been talking about today, a lot of people think is kind of settled or solved, and that's not the case.
Mr. Mayor, Nxumalo, I keep going back to the story that you told us at the beginning of this, which is a young woman who was stoned to death for having HIV and AIDS. And the reason she was stoned to death is because she came out and said she had the disease. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So here we are hearing that one of the most effective aspects of a change campaign is a powerful personal narrative. And here's a woman who braved stigmatization to come out and say, I have HIV, and she was killed for it. Do you think that the inverse would be true today? Could a different young woman come out and say, I have HIV, and be seen as a leader rather than someone to be punished?
Yes, because even in South Africa, it has changed altogether in Durban. That today people can come out openly, whether you are a man or a woman, a young man or a young woman. So you can come out openly and declare that you are HIV positive, and nobody's killed for that. So I think the campaigns that we have embarked upon to make sure that we educate people about their rights, but at the same time to make sure that we need to support those people who are already infected and affected with HIV and AIDS, and protect them as well. So I think that message has gone across to all of our people, because there's nobody today who's being killed because we are HIV positive. I think we've done very well in that regard. All what we need to do now is to make sure that we concentrate on young people, particularly young girls and young women between the age of 14 and 25, to make sure that they are not actually being infected with HIV and AIDS. In fact, we want to move to 0 new infection in South Africa so that by 2030 we end HIV and AIDS.
Alexandre, when it comes to solving the world's problems, is it just that the kids are going to solve it for us? I mean, at the end, I say that like I'm 1,000 years old, which maybe I am, but the idea that young people are, so on some level, it's heartening to hear that young people are engaged and changing the world to be a better place. At the same time, when you think about issues like climate change or the HIV epidemic, it's going to be a long time before they get into positions of power to really finally solve these problems. And that time seems like something we can't waste.
Yeah. So I do agree. When you're 20, you are not driving just the car, but you can put the pressure. And that's what we see now. This new generation, I will give you an example. When we start asking questions to HR units, so human resources from those big organizations in the US or in Europe and Asia, we're asking them, to share with us the 3 or 4 main questions when those kids, the young students, are starting the interview process. First question, always the same. What kind of, for you, when you started at the Atlantic, what kind of job it will be? What is the description of the job? Second question, always the same. Money. Sure, you will negotiate money, you want to discuss. But the third question, 10, 20 years ago, it was always about the size of the office, see if the office was facing the street or the backyard. Now the third question for this generation is, I will work so hard to be successful and to make you successful. What you will do with the success I will bring to you. And I can assure you that 2 or 3 years ago, the movement is now. It was not there 3 or 4 years ago. Everything, the timing is now, and that's interesting because HR, when they start listening to those students saying, I'm a totally different person, I will put pressure on you, and you will go back to your CEO, and you will change. So I do agree with you. The pressure will come from the bottom. It won't come from the very top. So sometimes you have people like Paul Pullman or some others like the MAC Fund, and they are giving 1%, 0.5%, whatever, but they are doing things. Otherwise, it will come from the very bottom. And that's why it is interesting. They won't run, or they won't, barely drive the car, but they will put the pressure at the right places.
I know you're nodding along, Matthew, so I want to let you go here.
Thank you. I'm just so excited because we have 150 million users at change.org, so we see a lot of data, a lot of trends. Young people under 25 are a smaller percentage of our overall user base, but they win more campaigns than any other segment of our user base because they are just, as I said, the personal narratives and the most compelling storytellers. And there are corporations that are doing incredible work. There are also corporations that are doing not so awesome stuff all the time. and when you are a corporation and a split screen on a cable news debate with a young person, with a 13-year-old girl, like you've already lost, right? And we see this happen everywhere in the world now where we have users. So I'm just very excited about the fact that this isn't some futuristic thing that's going to happen. This is happening today, right here, now.
And Rebecca, I feel like part of the reason this is happening isn't just that the youth of today are particularly engaged, but also technology. I mean, there's technology there for organizing, for messaging. That seems to be a critical part of all of this.
Right, it is, but I would argue, I really think an important piece of our model is training the employees in the government who are already working there, right? So we're working with the University of Maryland, NYU, and the University of Chicago to develop these certificate courses. So they're fashioned after executive education courses, and it's kind of a survey of data analytics. So how do you formulate a research question? How do you manage your data? Some data analytics, database management. How do you know what's missing? So there's a statistician who comes in and helps you identify, is your sample biased? You scraped a bunch of web data from social media. Well, who's not tweeting, right? And so we think it's very important not only to have all the young data scientists come in and change the world, but we also need to be training the staff who are already working in the city agencies to think very carefully about the types of questions they're asking, make sure they're using the data appropriately, and then make sure they're also able to communicate out to their colleagues and to their broader constituents how they've done the work and keep it transparent.
And is there like a target? I mean, what's the age range of those employees that you're working with?
Great question, and we've been debating back and forth about that and talking a lot to city agencies to see who they think is most appropriate for these courses. We've landed on kind of a 2 to 6 years out of a master's type window, but I'm very interested to see if we want to target people who've been working there a little bit longer. So we don't know the answer yet.
Go ahead.
Just about technology and innovation. Sometimes we're always using just the term technology to try to explain. We can just leapfrog. We are saying that it's more about the thinking. So it's what we call design thinking or open innovation. In that case, what we're trying to do, and that's how we work with mayors and cities around the world. When we are able to find something that works very well somewhere, we're trying to see how can we franchise it? How can we bring something so efficient somewhere and say, oh, why not in South Africa? Why not in Jamaica? Because if it works there, for sure, different culture, but everything we are saying, we can bring something to just another place. So and it works so well. In this business world, franchise, they're everywhere. Why not? I'm not saying we'll do the McDonald's of nonprofit and social good, But why not? If you were able to do something, and we can find some amazing social entrepreneurs in the world. They don't have to reinvent the wheel. They don't have to start everything from scratch. We can find organizations, and we can just show that it's working. And then for you, it's so important because you have so much work. It's hard for you to just barely scout the world to see the innovation. That's what we are trying to achieve. Is finding the most amazing, impactful organizations and going after cities, because everything, not everything, but almost everything starts there at the local level.
Alex, I wanted to just say, because when we spoke earlier about whether or not there is enough talk and dialogue taking place among cities, and James said yes, that's not my experience. I don't believe we're talking enough. That might be happening in Africa, but certainly from where I sit, once in a while we come together, certainly at the Global Alliance of mayors and leaders of from African descent. Yes, we have begun that discussion, but I don't believe that we have created enough opportunities to actually share best practices or even ideas. So opportunities like these help, but I don't believe that there's any structured opportunity for that kind of discussion. So, maybe we do a lot of these networks and alliances, but sometimes those actually do work. So we know we have the Sustainable Cities Network, we have all these education, for example, and all of those. We actually have not established one where we are able to just put out there, this is what I'm doing, this is what you're doing. So let's look at what is being done, and let's kind of feed off each other in terms of what we're doing. And I believe that that is one of the missing pieces.
Micheal, from an activist perspective, do you feel like the activist community is talking to all the people it needs to be?
So, as the youngest person I assume on the stage,
Really?
I assume.
Okay.
Own it. You can have it.
All right. Yeah. So I would say, I've worked with a lot of young people. Right now, I'm working with a group of young people to organize a pre-conference for the upcoming AIDS conference. And I've worked with other group of young people before. And I see we talk about young people, talk about sex and HIV. And sometimes when young people go online to search for HIV, to when, search for sex is when they're about to have sex. And, they're like, oh, what do I do? Or they speak to their friends at school. They don't discuss to their friends, to their parents at home. And when they go online to search for porn, right? There's not enough information for them online about HIV. There's no we have thousands of hookup apps, a lot of hookup sites online, but there's no specific information for a young 16-year-old woman to go online to search for where's the nearest clinic for me to go? How do I use a female condom? Or what is PrEP, for instance? Even there are breaks of information online, but there's not enough information for them. So when we talk about technologies, what kind of technology are we for HIV world, right? There's this lot of fancy technologies over there, but when it comes to HIV, we don't have so much about it. We have very limited data. Technology for HIV. For instance, there was a meeting organized by Facebook last year to look about what young people are searching for around HIV on Facebook, and they brought a lot of young people around the world to the table. And you can see a young guy from Malaysia. He said, the only time I go to Facebook is for hookup, or talk to my friends. And my friends, I have a lot of group chats on Facebook where we talk about, who we are dating, or, who we talk to. And we have several discussions online, but we don't have HIV. We don't talk about HIV in these spaces. And if we had a special dedicated stuff on Facebook.
Do you think that's because of stigma, or there's just no forum for it?
I think it's the way we've framed HIV. It's this space.
Right.
It's
this sex, space. But it's not the sex that you talk about online.
It's the way we framed it. It's it's this, it's something that, it's bad. You do not talk about it. So when the young person asks you about HIV, have you had sex? How come you ask me about HIV? Let's go test. The guy will be scared to even talk about HIV with an adult because, understand that, when you talk about HIV, it's either you have an STI or you've had sex already. And we talk about risky behavior, and I was listening to the panel earlier, they were talking about risky. What is risky?
Right.
What is risky? Is it the way I normally have sex that it's not risky? Nobody, I was born to come have sex naturally. This is natural behavior of human beings.
By calling it risky, you're already marginalizing it.
We are calling it risky and dangerous behavior.
Oh, youngest person on stage, you're teaching us all about pushing the envelope. We have a couple of minutes for questions, so I'm sorry to interrupt you, Micheal, but I want to make sure that folks in the audience get a chance to ask something. Okay, so we have mics going around, and if you could just state your name and maybe where you're from before you ask the question, that'd be great.
Hi, my name is Micheal from the Osborne Association. I heard a lot about different messaging techniques And my question is not really for messaging towards people that are at risk for HIV, but more for people that have the power to change the approach. So how much work has been put into taking the socio-politics out of the messaging and finding common ground with our more conservative counterparts? So like the economics, putting that initial investment in medication access, healthcare access, housing, utilizing those messaging forms to get common ground with conservatives and make it so that it's not a political issue, it's not a social issue. Because we know that housing, we know that the medications, they have lower community viral loads, you have less AIDS diagnoses over time. It pays for itself, the savings. So what kind of work is being done to take the argument away from the stigma of HIV, but more towards that dollars?
So Matthew, let me start with you on this, because I feel like, can you divorce an issue like HIV and AIDS from the socio-cultural political context?
I don't.
I mean, is there an analog that you guys have worked on, or?
I'm trying to think. Nothing that's coming to my head right now, Frank. But it's a great question. It's actually not a question that
Take a stab at it.
Yeah, I was going to give a perfect example of the housing aid services of New York City. It's called ASA. They provide housing for people living with HIV. And when you walk to an ASA, I was an ASA client once, and when you walk to an ASA center, like the stigma is already clear that people who are poor, people who are infected with HIV, who are about to die, that only works in there. Right? That's already like a stigmatized area already. You don't want to work in there. So how do you even you don't, for instance, I'm going to say this, like you only see mostly maybe people of color who live with HIV, who goes there. You don't see a fancy white guy from Manhattan going in there. Even the place they're located at. So these are like, how do we talk about these kind of things when we're already in our brain, in our mind, we already stigmatized, like HIV is this thing that, it's relegated to people who are poor, people who are marginalized already.
Alexandre, but I would imagine that one of the arenas in which you can talk really specifically about sort of systems and take it out of the socio-cultural context is maybe in business. I mean, I just feel like business processes this stuff in a way that's different from, let's say, the activist community or the political community. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, but what else? What's the question, Alex?
Well, to your question is...
It's a pretty long question. So.
Yeah. Well, the idea with something like HIV and AIDS, in the conversations you've had with corporate folks, can you take it out of the sort of political, socio-cultural context and find solutions just based on whether it's housing or healthcare?
I'm with Matthew. I don't know. Honestly, it's...
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, going back to sort of my core message about the personal story, like there are lots of intractable, difficult, challenging questions that enter into the political sphere that when you actually have a personal narrative associated, a human story that take on just a different contour, and you can get people kind of coalesce around that story in a way that you can't when it's in the political frame. So if that's what I see happen all the time in social media, is this sort of crowd mentality, people coming together around that narrative, around that individual story. And when you have that story, it's sometimes possible to sort of divorce the tricky politics.
Yeah, and I think for what we see is to scale something, it has to be a political sign at some point. Just if you want to start something, you can do it. It's small, and you can push this away. But you really want to scale this to be more successful. You need to go and you need to talk with cities. You need to talk with local governments. There's no other way to do it. So that's why we see this blending between just the two worlds has to be better, and that's what is not today. Let's be very clear. You have on one end people trying to do their best, and they are doing their best as entrepreneurs, and then we need to connect them in the best way possible with, the budgets, the money. So one, you have this with the policymakers; they have trillions of dollars. Another one is, corporations. There is no other way to really scale innovation in a big way.
And in a perfect perfect world, evaluating these types of programs should not be political at all. It should just be a data-driven exercise in a perfect world.
It should be. It should,
Just wanted to say that media has a role to play in this also.
Sure.
So it's because of what is portrayed out there about HIV. It's what people take in. Like HIV is only talked about when it's Waters Day or it's when 1,000 people are dying. We don't even see HIV drugs being advertised on TV. We don't see those kind of things on TV. I mean, kudos to New York City. We have PrEP on Subway and everything. But apart from that, we don't see HIV in a way that we can relate to it. It's in settings where we're talking to our doctors. It's in settings where we don't see it in public space where other things are like malaria or TB or other flu, for instance, different flus that we talk about. We don't talk about it in that way. We only talk about it in a way that is stigmatized. It's not something that has to be in the media, for instance.
well,
So,
right, and
yeah.
media brownout on it is a form of stigmatization in and of itself, right?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we have to leave it there. I'm sorry. I know everybody had lots of questions. Our fantastic panel. Thank you all. Thank you both the mayors of Kingston and Durban. Thank you all.